I'm really excited to talk with you guys a little bit about vaping. Just a little bit of background on who I am. My name is Jessica Barrington-Trimis. As Ashley mentioned, I'm an assistant professor at USC. I'm an epidemiologist by training. This was a profession that pretty much nobody knew about a year ago, and now everybody knows what epidemiologists are because of the pandemic. But epidemiologists largely do research to try and understand different things that are happening that are impacting the health of different people, different populations. So most of my research is really focused on substance use among young people. I'm really, I do a lot of different studies. I do some studies where I talk with young people and find out, why they're like what kinds of products they're using or their peers are using, why they're using them, really to try and learn more about what young people are doing and how it's impacting their health. We also do a number of different studies that are cohort studies where we go into schools, we administer surveys to high school students every semester or every year and ask them to tell us about what they're doing, what their peers are doing, so that we can learn more about the kinds of things that are impacting young people today. So today I'm going to focus not too much on the actual research that I'm doing in terms of the study results or anything like that, but just to talk with you all a little bit about e-cigarettes and what we know about e-cigarettes, really with kind of an emphasis on how big tobacco has been involved in the vaping industry. That's something that a lot of people don't really know. They're not super aware of, but I think as a young person who's making decisions about what you want to do, I think you guys need the full story, right? And you need to understand how big tobacco, which is a notoriously not good industry, has had an influence on the vaping industry and what their role has played. So my goal for today is really just to help provide some information about e-cigarettes, about what we know about e-cigarettes, and about some of the things that are being done to manipulate young people into using these products, with the hope that you all can have enough information to make well-informed decisions. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so this is the basic anatomy of a pod-based e-cigarette. Now we have the Fix and the Juul here. Juul is not as popular of a product as it used to be. I think in large part because they are no longer available in flavors. Juul is only available in tobacco flavor and menthol flavor now. In most places, although of course there are knockoff pods that you can use with the Juul. But so we've seen a little bit of a decrease in popularity of Juul, but there are a lot of other products that are very similar, and I think a lot of the things that I'm going to tell you about are relevant to lots of different products that are currently on the market, like Puff Bar or other Cali Bar, other things like that. Okay, so the way these work, they've got they're a device with a rechargeable battery, and there are cartridges or pods that get inserted into that battery. Usually when you buy the cartridges or pods, you'll see some sort of cover on them. Usually that indicates sort of what the flavor is. Cartridges and pods almost always contain nicotine. Early on, there was a lot of misperception that these products just really didn't have much nicotine in them, if any, and a lot of products were being marketed as 0 milligrams of nicotine, but found when we did analysis of these products to have, not negligible levels of nicotine in them. Okay, so that's like the first thing to be aware of. Almost any product that you will be using has nicotine in them. There are this newer wave of e-cigarette products such as the Juul and Puff Bar and many of the other products that are on the market. Any of the ones that are usually marketed as like 5% nicotine or 3% nicotine, those products use what's called a salt-based nicotine formulation, whereas a lot of the mods and other types of products use free-based nicotine. Now, the thing to know about salt-based nicotine formulations is that they contain very, very high levels of nicotine. So you're looking at maybe 41 milligrams of nicotine versus 25 milligrams of nicotine. And you can see the difference in size here of these things as well. And the way that they are able to have such high levels of nicotine in these salt-based nicotine products is because they use the salted formulation. And the salted formulation basically just allows you to pack a ton of nicotine into a product, but it doesn't feel like you're using that much nicotine, right? So typically when you use a product that has very, very, very high levels of nicotine, you inhale the nicotine, your throat is like, oh God, this is horrible. You may cough a lot. Like it's very, very aversive to use. But the thing that was one of the reasons that made Juul so popular when Juul came about is that they used this new salt-based nicotine formulation. And what this did is it allowed very, very high levels of nicotine without that horrible, like, I can't inhale this. It's too harsh. It's horrible. Nicotine in Juul, you have high levels of nicotine, but doesn't feel any different. It feels smooth. It often will go down. You'll get a little bit of a throat hit, but there's high levels of nicotine because of this manipulation of the way that the nicotine is formulated. Okay, and often, pods are not made to be refilled. We know a lot of people can refill them, but they're not generally meant to be refilled. Okay, so what does addiction feel like? When you inhale something, a substance that is not that's an addictive substance, oftentimes you'll feel like irritation, throat hit something, and that's the body's way of saying like, hey, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel normal. I shouldn't be doing this. Cigarette users become tolerant of this over time, and same thing with vapors. And often we'll just associate it with receiving a hit of nicotine. So you take a hit, you associate it with that throat hit. Your body reacts to the nicotine, which may give it a pleasant feeling, and your body starts to develop this this sort of addiction and dependence on it, right? And your brain starts to associate every time you use a product that it's similar, it associates it with a good feeling. Okay, so it's very easy then for your brain to really develop a dependence on nicotine. And with these new salt-based nicotine products, it makes it even easier because now you get just a little bit of that irritation with a lot of nicotine, and your brain very quickly learns to want and desire and need that nicotine. All right, so let's just take a quick example here. So you can see here like a can of Coke. Let's just imagine that there's like, a crap ton of other sugar added to the Coke. So you have a regular Coke, like add a bunch of sugar to it. Okay, so it's super, super, super sweet. You may not be that interested in drinking that, or you drink it and you're like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like this is way too sweet. But let's say that soda companies or that Coke was able to manipulate the way that the sugar was formulated. So we have still that massive amount of sugar that's added in there, but now it just tastes like a regular Coke, right? So you drink it and you're like, okay, well, this tastes like a normal Coke. But now instead of having just the normal amount of sugar, which is a lot in a regular Coke, you have twice or three times as much sugar that's packed into that same Coke. Now you're getting all of the same amount of you're getting all this extra sugar, but your brain thinks that it's just like a normal Coke, right? And so if you think about like sugar addiction, the rate at which you'll develop a sugar addiction is going to happen much more quickly with this like sugar packed drink. But your brain is tricked. Your brain doesn't even know that that's what's happening. And that's what's happening with Juul and other products that use a salt-based nicotine formulation. They're packing way more nicotine and tricking your brain into thinking like, oh, it's not that much nicotine, right? And so if you think about nicotine being a really, really, really addictive chemical, the amount of time it takes before people are addicted to nicotine in using a Juul, it happens really, really quickly. Okay, one other thing to point out here. Very early on, there was a lot of discussion about how the stuff that comes out of an e-cigarette is just water vapor. And it's useful to note that there are a lot of other chemicals that are in the vapor that comes out of an e-cigarette. It's not just water vapor. It is lots and lots of other stuff. When we have looked at the chemicals that are in e-cigarettes, these on this page, these are all the chemicals that are in regular cigarettes. When we look to see, oh, well, what chemicals are found in e-cigarettes, early on, people are like, oh, it's just like one chemical, nicotine, right? But with a lot of research, we have found that there are tons and tons and tons of other chemicals that are in e-cigarettes and in the aerosol. All of these ones that are in orange here, yep, show up, are all chemicals that are known to be harmful, and they're on the FDA list of harmful and potentially harmful substances. All right, so again, when you think about that pod, one of the main things to think about is that there is a ton of nicotine, as we talked about, in addition to lots of other things. So you have that nicotine. You also have benzoic acid, which pairs up with nicotine to help deliver the nicotine. You have glycerol, propylene glycol. These things are common ingredients that are found in e-cigarettes, but are not approved by the government for inhalation. And then, of course, you see lots and lots of other chemicals, as I just mentioned. All right, when we talk about nicotine amounts, sorry, the next one. There's a lot of variability. E-liquids are largely not regulated, which means that nobody is sort of measuring out e-liquids saying, oh yeah, you're right, like this only has a small amount of nicotine, or the amount of nicotine in this product is the same as what they're telling you on the package. A lot of that is, not happening. And so we don't, you get these products that are being sold that have no sort of accountability. There's nobody that's making sure that when you get a product that says it's a 5% nicotine solution, that it's actually a 5% nicotine solution. And lab studies that have looked at the amount of nicotine have found that there's a lot of variability within a given product in terms of how much nicotine is actually in there. And more often than not, there's way more nicotine in the products than is advertised on the package. The other thing is that the tobacco and vaping industry, and we should think about them as being the same because there's a lot of overlap, or at least being related, because there's a lot of overlap between the vaping industry and the tobacco industry. The other thing that they do is really try and confuse people. Okay, so let's take an example of a Juul here. This is a 4-pod. It says 5% strength. What does 5% mean? Does anybody know what 5% means? Who knows, right? 5% could mean a lot. It could be a little. When you say something like 5% versus 41 milligrams of nicotine, 5% sounds a lot lower than 41 milligrams of nicotine, right? And so this is a good example of one of the industry tactics that's trying to convince people who are looking at this product, oh, it's only 5% nicotine, right? It's only 5%. But they're not telling you, oh, well, 5% is 41 milligrams of nicotine, which is the equivalent of 2 packs of cigarettes. It's a ton of nicotine that is packed into one tiny little pot. So the industry wants you to be confused. If you're confused and think like, oh, 5%, like that's a low amount of nicotine, but it's actually like a ridiculously high amount of nicotine, then you're being manipulated into thinking that there's not as much nicotine as there may be in this product. Okay. So let's talk briefly about like what's actually in these things. So one pack of cigarettes is roughly 20 milligrams of nicotine, so about 1 milligram of nicotine per cigarette. A Juul pod has, as I mentioned, has about 41 milligrams of nicotine, which means that one Juul pod is the equivalent of about 2 packs of cigarettes or 41 cigarettes. A fixed pod is a little bit bigger. It's got about 75 milligrams of nicotine in it, equivalent to about 75 cigarettes. And a Soren pod, this is kind of one of the older versions of a Soren pod, has 90 milligrams of nicotine, or is capable of having 90 milligrams of nicotine, which is the equivalent of 90 cigarettes. Okay, so these things look similar. Like if I were to guess early on and you showed me a Juul pod versus a pack of cigarettes, I don't think I would have thought that the Juul pod has twice as much nicotine as the pack of cigarettes. And so again, this is just more information for you all. It's information that you need to have and should have when making decisions about the kinds of things that you are going to do. And it's worth understanding, like, how is the industry manipulating you to trick you into thinking that things are sort of not as dangerous as they are. All right, so let's talk briefly about nicotine. So we know a lot of different things about nicotine. Nicotine rewires and changes the brain. It causes your heart to beat faster because it induces this fight or flight response. It can lead to trouble breathing and damage to your lungs, and can also lead to increased acid reflux. One of the things that is the most important about nicotine is that it changes your brain. And our brains continue to develop and grow until we're in our mid to late 20s. So the earlier you start using nicotine, the more potential there is for nicotine to totally rewire your brain. So you take nicotine in, your body develops these nicotine receptors that bind to the nicotine, and then your brain starts to develop more of those. The more nicotine you use, the more nicotine receptors you develop, the more your brain says, you know, I need this nicotine. The thing about the nicotine receptors is if you've got, 100 nicotine receptors in your brain and there's no nicotine, your brain's feeling it. Okay, your brain is like, where's my nicotine? I need my nicotine. And the more receptors you build, the more your brain is like, when you don't have nicotine, I need nicotine. Where's my nicotine? Right? And that's the idea of addiction or dependence, is that your brain is changing. It's developing all these things that are saying, I need nicotine. And the more you use, the more your brain says, okay, now I need way more nicotine. And if you think about it, like having 5 nicotine receptors versus 50 versus 100 versus 200, the more receptors you have, the more nicotine you need in order for your brain to feel normal again. And that's the problem with addiction. And once your brain is in that place where you're like, I need nicotine, it's really, really hard to stop using nicotine. All right. As we mentioned, it can impact the lungs, the heart, the brain. And there has been a lot of research on this. So nicotine in e-cigarettes is addictive, as we know. Like, nicotine is an addictive chemical, and it can also damage your DNA. It can like increase your heart attack risk. There's a lot of things that we know about nicotine in terms of adverse effects. All right, so what is the industry not telling us? There is so much. They are keeping a lot of this secret, right? These things can all have lots of different impacts on different parts of your body, and it's worth, being aware of that. Like, there's metal components, there's all kinds of aerosols, there's all kinds of things that can really have an impact on your body and also on your community. This is a good example of another problem with all of these products, is the effect on the environment, right? This is an underwater picture of a Juul that was found in the ocean. You saw the trash in the last picture. And so there's all these other impacts that are kind of not things that we think about, but just downstream effects of these products, and a lot of electronic waste that has been developed with the introduction of e-cigarettes to the US. All right. Okay, so it's kind of coming back to the same point. It's like, what does the industry know and how is the industry manipulating you? And I hate to take like such a harsh stance on the tobacco industry, but like we know that the tobacco industry is evil. There are lots and lots of documents in a giant database of different things where the tobacco industry has been doing whatever they can to try and get young people addicted, right? Because they get young people addicted and then they have lifelong customers. Okay? When people who are in high school, even early adulthood, start smoking, the likelihood that they're going to be able to quit smoking is low. Once you become an established smoker, success rate for quitting is less than 10%. Okay. And when you talk to old people who smoke, I will tell you like 95% of them say, I wish I'd never started smoking when I was young. The industry knows this. They get people young, they get you hooked on nicotine, and then it's really, really hard to quit. So the industry knows that there are certain tactics that really work for getting young people addicted to nicotine. The first is the use of flavors. I know that you guys have not been alive in a time when regular cigarettes had flavors, but that's how they started early on. Cigarettes are available in menthol still, which is a flavor that is often used by young people when they start. Menthol does the same thing, does menthol sort of coats the harsh feelings, right? It's again another tactic used by the industry to get people to use these products so that it doesn't feel that bad at first, and you start using them, become addicted, and then you can't stop. And they make tons and tons of money. Changing social norms, capitalizing on what's cool or hip, marketing, there's a lot of marketing strategies that go straight to young people. A lot of influencers on TikTok and YouTube and all kinds of other social media platforms are being paid by the tobacco and vaping industry to promote their products. Because they know when young people who are influencers start using these products, that other young people will be interested in using them as well. It's worth thinking about, like, there's all these old smokers, right? Who's going to replace them? Obviously, the tobacco industry is looking to young people. It's looking to young people to replace all the old smokers. All right, so flavors. It is worth talking about flavors. Flavors have been a huge thing in e-cigarettes because there has been no regulation and no ability for, or maybe not no ability, but no regulation from the government regarding flavors. If you're thinking about, oh, hey, do you want to use this e-cigarette that comes in tobacco flavor versus this e-cigarette that comes in like cherry crush, or pina colada or nerds flavored, right? Those are flavors that are way more appealing to everybody, not just to old smokers who are trying to get off of e-cigarettes, but to everybody, to people who, especially to young people. I know that for me, like, I would be way more inclined to use a product that was nerd flavored compared to a product that was tobacco flavored. And again, this is another tactic by the vaping industry. They're trying to get people hooked. They want people to start using, especially young people who are very susceptible to addiction. They really want young people to start using these products. And flavors has been a tool that the industry has used to try and get kids addicted to nicotine. As of, I think, not that long ago, there were 15,000 different flavors. I'm sure that the number of flavors is larger now. You can see some examples here: booger sugar, banana butt, honey doo doo, Barney Pebbles, Dragon's Blood. The list goes on and on and on. There's like basically any flavor that you could want is available. And again, it's important to note that this is an industry tactic. They're trying to get people hooked. You can also see back to flavorings. A lot of advertisement that is really aimed at young people. So these are advertisements of young influencers, again, with the tactic to try and get people to use these products. If e-cigarettes were really primarily being, and if the industry really wanted e-cigarettes to be used by old smokers, why would these advertisements not include old smokers in them? But they don't include old smokers. They include young people because the industry wants young people to start using these products. Okay, and again, why do they want young people to start using these products? Because they get money from them. All right, so this is a quote from a paid Juul influencer. They liked my edgy style and that I appealed to the younger market. This was a person who was paid by Juul to market Juul. We also see a lot of problematic memes and cartoons. I'd rather lose my Juul than lose you, Juul proposal, Juul pods 25 miles, water a quarter mile. And these kinds of things circulate the internet. You all know that. And again, come back to like these products being widely used and popular among young people. All right. It's worth noting that while the vaping industry really tried to distance itself from the tobacco industry early on, there is a lot of overlap between the two. Big tobacco is a lot of times big vape. The company that sells Blue, which is a very popular e-cigarette, also sells Newport. The company that sells Mark 10 also sells Marlboro. The company that sells Views, which is another popular e-cigarette, also sells Camel. Juul is owned by Altria, which is a big tobacco company as well. Okay, so there's a lot of overlap there, and this idea that like e-cigarettes and the e-cigarette industry is not the same as the tobacco industry is just a mistake. And so here's some additional products sold by these companies. Okay, so again, coming back to this, and I'm going to stop here in just a minute. Their goal of Big Vape: deliver as much nicotine in the most non-invasive way to addict customers, introduce flavors that attract young people, and then downplay the harms of these flavors, and use marketing strategies such as social media known to attract young people. This was something originally from Juul Labs. Fact, Juul Labs is not big tobacco. We are an independent vapor company on a mission to eliminate cigarettes. But guess who owns Juul? Okay, Juul Labs is big tobacco. The people, Altria, who owns Marlboro cigarettes, invested almost $13 billion in Juul Labs, and they own about 50% of the company at this point. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take any questions.